And on behalf of our program, I'd like to welcome Professor Sofia Vasilopoulou. She's a professor in politics at the University of York and an expert on the Golden Dawn. She holds a PhD in politics from the LSE. She works on various topics in political science, like political dissatisfaction with democracy, democratic institutions across Europe. Other themes are Euroscepticism, extremism, and loss of faith in traditional politics. She has published widely in many esteemed academic journals, and she's also the co-editor of, correct me if I'm wrong, Sophia, I think it's the most established political science journal in Europe, the European Journal of Political Research right now. She's also the convener of the ECPR standing group on political parties. She has published 2 books, if I'm not mistaken. The most recent one, and one that pertains to our topic here, is The Golden Dawn's Nationalist Solution, explaining the rise of the far right in Greece, co-authored with Daphne Pulu, another very highly qualified academic that we had the pleasure of hosting in the past, I think 3 years ago. And the idea today, actually the idea originated with our program's administrator, Dr. George Sirimis, who I see among our panelists. Also among our panelists is our program director, John Giannakopoulos, who is the James Tobin Professor of Economics at Yale University. So we were thinking that after the trial of the Golden Dawn, a chapter is more or less closing in Greek politics that really affected Greek political life very immensely, and it's time to take stock of the phenomenon. Even though the Golden Dawn is really an old party, it started picking up steam during the Greek crisis around 2010, 2011, and now though the party is still here with us, its leadership is currently in jail, and the future of neo-Nazism in Greece looks to be grim. But of course, Sophia will tell us if this is indeed the case. So the format of the talk today will go like this. I will first ask a few questions. I know that Sophia has prepared a few slides to help her orient the discussion a bit better. And then we'll open up for the Q&A section. So at some point, I think in 30 or 40 minutes from now, we will start taking questions from the audience for about 20 to 30 minutes. I hope most of your questions will be covered in the beginning, but I'm sure you'll have more questions to address to Professor Vasilopoulou, and you'll have the chance to do that. Sophia, should we begin? Thank you again for coming here.
Hi, Paris. Thanks for inviting me. I'm not sure if my slides are shared now or...
Not yet. Not yet.
So let me just share my screen.
Sure. I think the first thing that would like you to do is to provide a brief overview of the rise of the Golden Dawn as a party, its general imprint on the Greek political system in terms of, its electoral performance, perhaps, the party's main characteristics, perhaps the section of Greek society that it mostly influenced. And from there, we can move on to more, more specific questions.
Mm-hmm. So I'm just sharing my screen.
Yep.
And I think, just give me 1 second.
Sure. I will take this opportunity to also thank Hira Jaffrey, our Director of Global Programs, who helped us immensely with the logistics of the event. All right, the floor is yours.
Everything is working, right?
Yep. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So Hello, everyone. Hello, Paris, and everyone else that is attending this seminar. I would like to also express my thanks and acknowledgements for being invited to this event by Paris and others. So thank you very much. This is my first opportunity to address this specific audience. And before I start my presentation, I should say that Paris asked me to discuss, as he just said, to discuss essentially the various potential reasons that led to the rise of the Golden Dawn a few years ago now. So I'll try to do that. And in doing so, I'll try to also allude to some of the reasons that I think might have also contributed to its fall. And perhaps the word fall might be slightly a strong word because we don't know yet what will happen. But I will use this word just to be provocative. But then, of course, I'm very happy to discuss the extent to which this phenomenon is really something that will go away and will dissipate in the Greek context, or whether actually maybe this is a temporary setback, as it were. So let me just start my presentation. I just wanted to briefly show you some electoral results of this party, just to make the point that essentially this was a political movement more than a party that has been going on in Greek politics in one way or another since essentially the 80s, really. It started more as a newspaper. That's why we're talking about it more with reference to movements as opposed to political parties. It did run for elections, but only selectively. So I have some electoral results from the mid-90s here, where it did not perform very well. You can see a very low percentage, very low number of votes. And then basically, all of a sudden, what we saw was a dramatic rise of this political party, essentially in 2012. It did run for elections in 2009, both European and parliamentary elections. It equally did not do very well. And I should add that it didn't do very well in European elections either. And usually these are the types of elections that you expect small, marginal, and more extremist parties to be more successful compared to national elections, simply because European elections are different kind of platforms, and they tend to be magnets more of a protest vote. That said, in 2009, which was arguably before the crisis, or really at the beginning, I mean, it depends where you pinpoint the beginning of the crisis, but certainly the party didn't do very well. And then all of a sudden, we witnessed about 7% of the vote, which, considering the ideological makeup of the party, which is rather extremist and uses violence in order to promote its ideas, that was a significant electoral result, and it was a bit of a shock in the system. That trajectory essentially continued until 2015. And I should say that, of course, we're talking about the trial and the verdict of the trial, which was a recent event. But by 2015, the trial was ongoing, and the party already, until then, was doing fairly well. Its rise perhaps reached this peak around 2015. And then we saw a decline. So in the most recent national and European elections, the party did not do as well, although considering that it was undergoing a trial for charges of being a criminal, of the leader running a criminal organization, perhaps gaining about 5% in the 2019 May European elections is not that low, or as low as one might have expected. But in the subsequent general election, national election, just a couple of months later, the party did not make the 3% electoral threshold that is required to access political representation in the Greek parliament. So the party does not have any members of parliament in the Greek parliament at the moment. So that's kind of pretty much of an overview of what's happened the last few years, couple of decades, when we're looking at the rise and perhaps the fall of the Golden Dawn. Now, as Paris mentioned, I was asked to reflect upon why this party became so successful, and perhaps why it became so successful at the time that it did, meaning during the Greek crisis, considering that the party was around for decades before that, but perhaps very few of us knew about its existence or operations. There had been some, let's say, scandals and issues around the party, and various charges about violence and so on, but these were essentially not particularly in the limelight. I'd like to draw upon some research I've conducted with my co-author Daphne Halikiopoulou on the Golden Dawn, and we published a book on this a few years ago, which we call The Golden Dawn's Nationalist Solution. And you'll find out why we've decided to have this title in a moment. But essentially, the core argument in the book is that there were two types of conditions that were necessary for the Golden Dawn to make its appearance and become successful around the crisis time. The first is the role of context, and I will explain that in a moment. So that being essentially an economic crisis that eventually became a crisis of the Greek nation state, and within that context, the ability of the political party to present a nationalist solution that appeared palatable across a broad range of socio-demographics, so across a broad range of people. And as I will show you later on, at least in 2012, 2014, around that time, the Golden Dawn was not necessarily deriving support from the sort of classic far-right voter. So that's pretty much the argument. I'm just gonna, I have a few slides just to unpack that a little bit more. So the role of context, and why does that matter? So, I mean, we all know that Greece experienced an economic crisis around basically after 2008-9. Perhaps some would argue that it started in Greece, it started around 2010. But essentially that economic crisis meant very high levels of government debt, extreme levels of unemployment, particularly youth unemployment, one of the highest in the European Union, which was met with high levels of taxation, austerity measures, cuts in public investment, cuts in welfare, cuts in education, in the health benefits, and so on. And I think to some extent, we've seen that in other European countries, such as, let's say, Spain or Portugal, that experienced the crisis. However, what we argue in the book and what we've seen in reality is that this economic crisis resulted in a political crisis in the Greek context, with a very economic crisis, which included lack of trust in the political system, an association of mainstream parties with corruption. A lot of people felt that mainstream parties were partly responsible for the crisis, and which led to at least a momentary, or for a few years, a breakup of the political system. We saw the implosion of one core mainstream party, PASOK. In Greece, we saw declining levels of support for New Democracy as well, although we did not witness the implosion of that party. And we saw great levels of electoral volatility. So we saw the rise of new parties across the political spectrum. Now, this political crisis was also correlated, let's say, with a crisis of democratic representation and a broader crisis of the nation state. The problem there was that essentially the people realized that the state was unable to mediate the effects of the crisis and to provide solutions. The health system was not working, the education system was not working. Essentially, what we saw was the breakup of the social contract, the citizens on the one hand, and the extent to which the state, on the other hand, and of course political actors associated with the state, was able to provide basic social services. So it is against this context that we should be able to understand the rise of the Golden Dawn. And within or against this context, what the Golden Dawn did was to provide a nationalist solution. And this is why, hence the title of our book. So we have a very strong economic crisis that resulted in a political crisis and a crisis of democratic representation. So essentially, the Golden Dawn was able to tap into widespread disillusionment with the political system and with political actors. And in this context, its national solution, this idea that the party is the savior of the nation and the defender of Greece, and the party's aim to revive and awaken the nation from its current degenerate condition actually became plausible across a wide range of people. How did they do that? I mean, the Golden Dawn, you might have heard this thing before, is in our book, we classify it not as a radical right party, but more as an extreme right party, more as a party that has some elements of fascism in its ideology. And these elements are the concept of social decadence, that the country has reached this degenerate condition, and the party, as being a savior and a defender of the country, will bring national rebirth. So these are what they called in the literature as the twin fascist myths. But of course, the Golden Dawn tried to put that forward in ways that are close to Greek national identity as well. So what did they do? What was part of their narrative? They talked about a very strict boundary between the national community, the Greeks, and the others, and which implied a sense of moral superiority over outsiders for some people. And they talked a lot about resisting foreign domination and also the domestic collaborators, people, the established regime, be it the political actors, the media, various actors that are related to the establishment, as being collaborators of these foreign dominant powers. And in this context, the party would restore the country's glory, previous glory. So it was drawing upon myths about how Greece used to be, and through its own nationalist solution, the country will become the same again, in a way, make Greece great again type of thing, but in a more kind of fascist style, restoring its past glory. So its core message, essentially, if one was to sort of boil it down, was that Greece was where it was for two reasons. Because we have foreign exploitative powers that want to take advantage of the country and destroy the country. And these exploitative powers are collaborating with domestic political elites and the domestic establishment, who is also responsible for this social decadence. So they made this argument about Hellenism being under attack, and that Greek identity should remain unaltered, and this is the party that would ensure that this is the case. So essentially what they've done is they blended the economic situation that Greece was going through with the gentleman that people had with the system. So that was on the one hand. They blended that idea with the concept that Hellenism is under attack and the party would save Greece from all this exploitation. So this concept appealed to quite a lot of people who felt nationalistic and felt that they were let down by the mainstream. Now, what we found interestingly, and I'll show you some graphs in a moment, is that their message around 2012 and 2014 appealed across a broad range of sociodemographics, so across a broad range of people. So traditionally, what we know from the literature is that people who are from, let's say, deprived backgrounds, sometimes rather old, sometimes rather young, people who might be unemployed, people who essentially are suffering from chains. These are the people who are more likely to express their discontent through voting for the far right. So poorer people, what we call the left behind, let's say. And our research, our voting behavior research on the Golden Dawn showed that essentially this economic grievance model did not necessarily explain most of the vote of the Golden Dawn. So in our models, classic sociodemographic variables like age, gender, where you live, if you live in a city or if you live in a rural area, or employment status, if you are unemployed or not, or income even, were not very important in helping us understand the vote. Rather, what we found rather important, and it is in line with the theoretical argument that we're making, is that it was all about disapproving the government, disapproving the system, being dissatisfied with the system. I have included in my slide here anti-EU because, of course, there was quite a lot of anti-European, Eurosceptic sentiment at the time, but this was relevant if you are right-wing already. So that's quite important because there's been quite a lot of discussion about far-left people moving to the Golden Dawn and so on. Perhaps some people have done that, but the general trend shows that people who opted for the Golden Dawn were primarily right-wing individuals who were essentially disillusioned with the situation. So the core criteria of the Golden Dawn vote was to overthrow the government and against the memorandum, and to renew the political personnel of this country. They wanted some kind of change. So I just have graphs I just want to briefly show to you. The first is basically this is the effect of dissatisfaction with democracy based on where someone is on the left-right dimension. So essentially what we find is the more right-wing someone is, the effect of dissatisfaction on voting for the Golden Dawn is higher. So the predicted probability is much higher. In other words, quite a lot of their vote came from dissatisfied right-wing voters. Now, the only sociodemographic variable that actually was sort of an exception, but it's a rather interesting exception, and I think I wanted to bring that up, was the role of education. So in line with classic theories, Golden Dawn voters were generally, had received lower education generally compared to non-Golden Dawn voters. So that's quite important in that sense. But other sociodemographics with regards to age, with regards to gender, with regards to income, whether you are unemployed or not, did not matter. So education is rather important, perhaps, in terms of how people interpret the message, as well, perhaps, how receptive they might be to those ideas. So that's pretty much what I had to say about the rise of the Golden Dawn. Just to summarize, essentially, we've tried to make this argument that two conditions were very important. The first being the context, so an economic crisis that culminated into a crisis of political representation, and the second being the ability of the Golden Dawn to offer a nationalist solution, so to link the crisis with nationalism, which became a kind of palatable argument across the political system.
Very good. So I understand that the Golden Dawn managed to leverage economic disaffection, wedding that to to elements that are more, symbolic and cultural in a sense, the Golden Nation, national rebirth, and so on, which explains part of the support, as you said, from former, right-wing voters. The question is, aren't these elements still present in last year or 2 years ago, when they started losing strength? So what really explains the downfall? Can we associate that to the fact that they were undergoing this trial, to the shock of the killing of Pavlos Fyssas in downtown Athens, or was it some other factor that hasn't been mentioned yet?
Yes, thank you. That's a very good question, actually. And starting from the framework I just put forward, again, just to remind you, I've kind of laid out essentially two conditions that help us understand the Golden Dawn, the rise of the Golden Dawn. The first one being essentially the economic crisis resulting into a political crisis and culminating into a crisis of a democratic representation. Now, that condition perhaps is no longer present, or certainly is no longer present to the same extent. So what we do know is that over time, since 2010, state capacity has improved and is been steadily improving. As an example, unemployment rates have dropped dramatically. They're still quite high, I should say, but if you look at the trajectory, things are improving over time. So this is quite important, because it shows, or it allows people to regain trust in the system and in the state. And I think another important variable here is that, to some extent, we can say that Greece has returned to this bipolar opposition like we used to have before. So we have, although PASOK imploded and is no longer as relevant as it was in the past, Syriza has essentially replaced it. And really, 2019 showed that it was a bipolar competition pretty much between Syriza on the one hand and New Democracy on the other hand. And that's quite important, because if you go back to bipolarity, that leaves less room for smaller parties to be relevant in the system. To some extent, now in hindsight, we realize that the breakup of the political system in 2012 was more of a short-term kind of result of the crisis, rather than something as deeply embedded as perhaps some of us might have thought at the time. It seems that Greek political culture does revolve around this bipolar majoritarian sort of opposition, and we have gone back to that pretty much now. So that's one thing. So I would say that, broadly speaking, the context has changed quite a lot, which does not give political opportunities to parties such as the Golden Dawn to be very successful. Now, the second condition, as it were, was about the nationalist narrative being palatable across a wide range of people. Now, I should say that condition 2 is somewhat there, but I think it has been undermined rather a lot by the criminal charges against the party. And this is because, not necessarily because of the ideas per se, although we don't really know, but I think the core issue here is the question of whether violence is a legitimate means in order to practice your ideas or put your ideas in practice. Now, we did know, of course, that the Golden Dawn was exercising violence. Even already in the 90s, there was a lot of investigations against people associated with the party. But perhaps the murder of Pavlos Fyssas brought that forward much more than was before. So although perhaps I'd say that this idea of a nationalist solution is perhaps still a narrative that could find some support across the Greek population. So there was this survey just a few days ago, at the beginning of October, asking people about the future of the Golden Dawn after the verdicts of the trial. And 1 in 5 people thought that actually a serious, what they call the serious Golden Dawn, meaning a non-violent party, but a party prioritizing its ideas, would actually be a useful addition to the political system. And actually that was 4 in 10, so almost half of right-wing voters. So what does that tell us? It tells us that perhaps the ideas, or some of the ideas, because by no means, I'm not suggesting that the Greek population is fascist by, I don't want to say anything like that, and I don't want to be misunderstood for saying something like that. But some ideas about the national rebirth, pride in our country, and so on are there, but the trials brought forward the means, and for a lot of people, not everyone, but a lot of people, the means is not necessarily as justifiable.
Let me go perhaps off script a bit here to ask something more provocative than Sophia. If these people who were voting for the Golden Dawn, the percentage was 6 or 7% of the voting population, which is rather significant. The question is, who had they been voting for in the past before the emergence of this party, and where are they now? Who are they voting for now? I guess my question is, has the center right in Greece, has New Democracy, the party that's in power today, managed to welcome back these voters into the fold, or do we expect to see new contenders out there who will represent what you just framed as, a serious Golden Dawn? Is New Democracy vulnerable on its right flank from the from a new development like that, or are we, or is this over for good?
Well, I don't know if it's over for good. I think history will judge that. But on the question of voting behavior, so people who opted for the Golden Dawn came from a variety of different backgrounds. But I think one uniting factor to about 90 to 95% was the fact that they were right-wing individuals. So they were self-placed as right-wing individuals ideologically. There were some exceptions, but I think the overall trend is they were right-wing. So quite a lot of them previously were voting for New Democracy or were simply not voting at all, because let's not forget that the Golden Dawn received some support from younger generations as well. And perhaps these people, these individuals, voted for the Golden Dawn for the first time. Now, what will happen in the future and whether New Democracy or other parties have something to fear? I should say, considering that the first condition is no longer as present as it was, and considering the change of context, right? Because now the context is health. And the health crisis, and we all know that when immigration is a salient issue in a political system, then far-right parties can capitalize upon that and can politicize that. Now we're talking about health. So health relates to competence. So at least at the moment, in the short run, I don't think any of the parties has much to fear. Now, what will happen in a couple of years when the health crisis might result into a deep recession, not just in Greece, but also across Europe, then of course we'll have to wait and see.
So a final question before we move on to the Q&A part then.
Can I just very briefly stop my slides?
Yeah, good idea.
So can you see me okay now?
Yep.
Yeah, super.
So we had a very interesting trial going on for, I don't know, what was it, a year and a half? I think it was more than that, actually. And the Greek state managed to put the Golden Dawn elite behind bars under the accusation of the party actually being, well, not the party, the specific individuals forming a criminal organization. It may sound very strange to people in other countries whose constitutions, for instance, would actually prosecute these people on purely political grounds. But in Greece, that was not the case. That led to the Golden Dawn complaining that it was all, an orchestrated political attack against the party, and that the accusation of a criminal organization cannot really stand. There were allegations that the New Democracy Party under Antonis Samaras wanted to put them in jail, and they started the whole process in order to win back their votes, actually. How can we assess at this point what went on in the trial? Do you feel satisfied with the way the judicial system treated this? Or do you believe that it will leave a legacy that the Golden Dawn might, in a few years when they're out of jail, or those who are still out of jail, might try to capitalize upon by portraying themselves as victims of state oppression or something like that?
Yeah, I think that's an excellent question. I would start by saying that it's much easier to build a legal case vis-a-vis a political party or some individuals for running a criminal organization compared to building the same legal case on the basis of the fact that these individuals or the party is inciting hatred and discrimination. That said, this has happened before in other European countries. So I'll give you a couple of examples. One was with the Flemish bloc, so around the mid-2000s, which actually was, the trial was in favor of the party inciting hatred. Essentially, the party disbanded, but then they got recreated, re-established under a different name. There was a couple, 2 or 3 charges against Geert Wilders in the Netherlands for inciting hatred. Most of them actually were, he was acquitted. So it has happened before, but I think, one, you run more the risk of the party or the people being acquitted because it's much harder to prove those grounds. Secondly, if this is just the problem, then the party could just rename itself and continue. Perhaps the charges would be lower. So in that sense, that was not necessarily a bad move on the part of the judiciary, as it were. That being said, I should say that the Golden Dawn is rather different to other political parties because you can actually make those charges. There are not that many far-right parties in Europe that are as violent as the Golden Dawn. So in a way, the fact that they did engage in violence provided also an opportunity for the judicial system. Now, what is rather interesting as a result of this is that despite the fact that actually the charges are about crime and violence. If you hear core people within the Golden Dawn Party and their statements after the charges were announced, they talk about them being prosecuted about their ideas instead, and they don't talk about being prosecuted on the basis of running a criminal organization, but they talk about their ideas, which is a rather interesting way of how they have essentially reframed the trial in terms of ideas. So for example, I recall that Niarchos, the leader of the party, made this statement about being proud for being sent to jail, being imprisoned for his ideas, and that history will bring him and his parties and the Greek people justice for having these ideas, sort of evoking this idea of sacrifice. So I'm sacrificing myself for my ideas, but my ideas are still out there. Kassidiaris, sort of the second in command, made statements along the lines that you cannot imprison our soul and our word, our ideas, our principles, and so on. So that could backfire in that way. Certainly, I can see that. And that again can draw from elements of Greek identity, this idea of sacrifice. You sacrifice yourself for the nation like our ancestors did, and so on and so forth. So they can play that card as well. Perhaps it's less easy for them to play this card now because A, they will be in jail for longer, and B, the charges were actually on the question of crime rather than on the ideas per se.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it always strikes me as rather not difficult to predict that as these guys have Adolf Hitler as a model, probably they're finding jail time as a good opportunity to write their own Mein Kampf and come back in a few years with a different political project. Now it's a good time for you to start asking questions. We already have a couple of questions from earlier. The question by Alexander Strecker has to do with the relationship between the Golden Dawn and the media, the fact that they started out as a small coalition of individuals around this magazine. I think it was a monthly magazine or a weekly magazine, I don't remember. And Alexander's questions has to do with whether this was influential and whether you can see a continuing link across history between the far right and the use of media in order to further their objectives.
Yeah, I think that's an excellent question, actually. And I think generally the far right does use quite a lot of different media to put forward their ideas. And that media could vary in the sense that, of course, there could be various newspapers and so on, but they have modernized quite a lot in the sense that they're using quite a lot of online media, their own personal channels. This is a general trend, I should say, across European political parties of the far right. But when it comes to parties such as the Golden Dawn, this is a core instrument for them to put forward their ideas. And is a useful way, perhaps, of thinking about it would be like a propaganda machine. So that's quite rather important for parties that espouse these fascist ideas. And if you go back into kind of classic fascist theory, propaganda machine was rather important. Now, who reads these things is a different story. Perhaps another useful way of thinking about that is, in the case of the Golden Dawn, they have quite a lot of material on their website. And most of this material, I think, are internally oriented. So they are oriented towards their existing entourage, as it were. But what you've seen, especially since they got elected, is that they were asking quite a lot of questions in the parliament. So they actually did make a lot of use of their ability, of their representation in the parliament. And these questions, mostly around immigration, but also other issues. Sorry, my daughter just came home.
No worries.
Yeah, so what I wanted to say was that they made extreme use of their representation in the Greek parliament as well. So they are using social media, they're using their own newspapers and so on, but they also used the type of sort of more democratic means, as it were, you know, through the classic parliamentary route to propagate their ideas. And these were more widely oriented across the entire political system, because of course the media, as in mainstream media, is more likely to pick up on an interpellation or an intervention by a member of parliament of the Golden Dawn and talk about that in the news, so that it becomes widely accessible. Whereas a comment by a Golden Dawn supporter or a Golden Dawn member in sort of communicated in their website is more for internal use, as it were.
Yeah, I guess the mainstream media did all the dirty work for the Golden Dawn up to a point in Greek society. Let's move on to the next question. Lauren Danforth is asking why the Golden Dawn did not capitalize on the Macedonian issue. I mean, you would have expected them to become issue owners when it came to the naming of Macedonia, but that didn't happen. There were other parties that took up this role. Why do you believe that was the case?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I mean, they did talk about that, but not as much as you would expect. Perhaps one of the reasons is that when this became part of, or came under the limelight again, we had already sort of gone back to the bipolar system of party competition. So really the debate was there between Syriza on the one hand and New Democracy on the other, and there were quite a lot of voices from New Democracy that to some extent were filling that gap. So I think perhaps that was why, yeah. Also, of course, they were quite busy with trying to make their case. There was also a little bit of an internal struggle within the Golden Dawn at the time, because the party was under investigation for being a criminal organization. There was also a split within the party between, on the one hand, the more sort of moderate individuals, perhaps led by Kassidiaris and some others, that wanted to bring the Golden Dawn a little bit towards the middle, in the sense of being less violent, less extreme, and less grassroots oriented. And then there was perhaps Michaloliakos and some others that are also wanted to continue this kind of paramilitary organization and so on. So in a way, they had quite a lot of internal struggles and internal debates that were quite prominent in the party at the time. So they didn't have enough time to perhaps come out with a much stronger message on Macedonia.
The next question is addressed to you by James Coyle, who's curious about the composition of the leadership of the Golden Dawn Party. So were these people newcomers in politics, or had they been affiliated with other major political parties in Greece? And a perhaps related question by Xenophon Papadimitris is whether you can observe any similarities between the Golden Dawn phenomenon in Greece and the offshoot, I guess, of Golden Dawn in Cyprus, and whether the fate of the Greek Golden Dawn will influence the Cypriot case.
Yeah, well, in terms of the Golden Dawn didn't have, well, first of all, that goes back to the point I just made with regards to a split within the party between the, let's say, the more
you don't want to call them moderate, I understand that.
yeah, well, exactly. So let's say the more old school people within the party, and the people that just wanted to make the Golden Dawn a bit more palatable to a broader audience, right? And what you see over time, because they also had to run more elections, they also ran local elections, regional elections, and so on, they had to add more people on their ballots. And so over time, they had a lot more new people. And most of these new people actually were, again, for lack of a better word, the more moderate wing of the political party. There were even some people who considered themselves intellectuals that were part of the party, but it was not as, there was some movement from former Laos, people who affiliated with Laos, with the Popular Orthodox Party in the past. And actually there have been many switches back and forth between the Golden Dawn and Laos. Not that many, but there have been some actually. So that's quite interesting actually to see. So there's not much to see from other political parties moving to the Golden Dawn. So mostly the people that they attracted were not previously affiliated, apart from some Laos members. Now with regards to your second question, with the Cypriot sister party of the Golden Dawn, I mean, the Cypriot sister party was never that successful for a variety of other reasons. And to a large extent, it was constantly waiting for a signal from Greece before they moved. So my hunch is that at least for the foreseeable future, they're not going to do that well, because they had already taken a back seat in Cypriot politics. And they need quite a lot of steering from Greece. And at the moment, perhaps that's not a priority for the core people in the party.
I'm still muted.
You're muted, yes.
The next question is by John Giancopoulos, our director. How does the influx of foreigners working remotely in Greece now affect nationalistic tendencies in the country?
Sorry, what was the question? How the influx of immigration?
Of foreigners working remotely in Greece now affect nationalistic tendencies in Greece. John, I'm not sure whether you're talking about Greeks coming back to Greece to work remotely from there, or foreigners who, for due to the pandemic, are working remotely from Greece. Let's wait to see if John answers. John, if you can clarify your question, we can come back to it. Until then, let's go to George Sirius's question. How does the Golden Dawn compare with other neo-Nazi movements in Europe? And do we know to what extent they coordinate their actions?
Yes, well, actually, that's a very interesting question. There is not so much research on that, simply because when these parties are really not at the party stage, but more at the movement stage, it's really hard to infiltrate and get information about these political parties. There has been quite a lot of anecdotal evidence that, yes, there is some coordination. In the sense that they might organize camps together.
Summer camps, you mean, right?
Yeah, summer camps. So education is a rather important element in their ideology, right? So this idea of propaganda, educating the people, the young, and so there has been collaboration in terms of running joint camps and so on that we know of. But I don't think there is enough research, simply because it's just hard to conduct this research on the exact links. And I should say that the links could be at many different levels, because the links that we're really talking about here are more at the grassroots level rather than at the political organization level. So it could be something that is not necessarily even organized by the leader themselves, right? But each far-right party of this kind will have a number of youth organizations that are loosely related, and this could happen at that level instead of the sort of more higher up political level.
The next question is from Bill Georgiou. He's asking whether there's an impact via the diaspora vote abroad. So we know that the Golden Dawn has supporters in the diaspora. Do you believe that I think actually the electoral system has changed to include diaspora voting. Do you believe that it's going to have an impact on future elections in Greece? And if not, with respect to the Golden Dawn, perhaps on the far right scene in general, will they receive a boost from the diaspora vote or not? What do you think?
I don't think so much. I think on average, the diaspora vote is quite minor to be taken into consideration. And not least because quite a lot of people living abroad just don't vote. And those that they vote generally do not vote for the Golden Dawn. That being said, because the Golden Dawn wanted to politicize this issue and say, look, you know, we are getting you votes from outside the country. I think we saw that quite a lot in the media, but I think it's quite different to, between how an issue is politicized and how it's presented in the media and whether it actually has a real effect on the political party. Mm-hmm. And the other thing is, of course, there were all these Golden Dawn branches in New York and other places. Now that the organization of the party is weaker because of the fact that core members are imprisoned, then I would find that organizationally speaking, will be harder to get all these people together and get them involved and get them motivated and mobilize them, as it were. So in that sense, really, what the trials are likely to do is to disempower the party from an organizational perspective, because let's not forget that this party is very leader-oriented. So although we know that Niarchos has in the past oriented the party from behind bars, he has done that before, so he might still do it again. The capabilities are lower, and certainly the capabilities of doing something abroad would be even lower and perhaps less of a priority.
The next question is, I guess, very crucial, but perhaps difficult to answer. George Theophanos is asking whether there have been any studies on the funding of the Golden Dawn. Parties require funding, and there's a lot of gossip about that, but I'm not sure we have concrete answers.
Yeah, I don't think we do have concrete answers. Of course, they get some funding. They received some funding from the Greek state as being elected members of the parliament. So there's something there. But I should say political parties such as the Golden Dawn do not require immense amount of funding, simply because they rely particularly on the grassroots organization, of which they have plenty, or they have had plenty, because they are grassroots type of movements. So actually, what they really want is, let's say, soldiers on the streets, bodies on the streets, to actually propagate their ideas. This is something they did have, and this is rather costly, but it's not costly from a funding point of view. It's costly in terms of how you will organize them, what these people will do, and so on. But in that sense, especially for the party to boost itself and become a minor party with like 5, 8, 10% of representation, that's quite enough for them.
Right. So it's more labor intensive than capital intensive in a way, right?
That's right, and I think we do know that because it is a grassroots organization, and also the rhetoric of the party, drawing again from kind of some fascist ideas, is drawing from this idea that people that are in the party need to be involved and need to be things. So there's a lot of things that, as you say, yes, they might be labor intensive, but funding in the traditional way that we think about it is not as important.
Okay, 2 last questions. Let's go back to John. John Giankopoulos is referring to the fact that we have a lot of Greeks in the past few years who have spent their lives abroad, and they've come back to Greece to work there. And you also have a lot of foreigners working remotely in Greece at the moment. The question is whether the presence of this element of former diaspora and foreigners in the country is having an impact, not necessarily on far-right politics, but on Greek politics in general?
Yeah, I think that's a great question, and I don't think we have enough research on this. One would assume that by traveling and by socializing yourself in a foreign environment and meeting more people, you become more multicultural and so on, which you might want to bring back when you come back to Greece. But the electoral effects of that, we haven't really seen that. And to be absolutely honest with you, I am an expert in voting behavior. The problem with this kind of research is that we don't have data to conduct this kind of research. So anecdotally, I can certainly attest to the fact that yes, there will be some change in the sense that these individuals that you're referring to are more likely to be tolerant, more likely to be open to minority rights, more likely to be open to equality and so on, just because they will bring their own experiences back home. So this is what the theory would predict. And anecdotally, I think they are, but as a political scientist, I would say we don't have an empirical test for this, so I don't want to make a causal argument about that.
Last question from an anonymous attendee, referring to the tension between Turkey and Greece lately in the Eastern Mediterranean, also the elections in Northern Cyprus. Do you believe that these tensions between the two countries would boost the electoral performance of right-wing parties in Greece or not?
Well, I think, look, for any political party to be successful, essentially you need demand side conditions that are ripe, but also supply side, meaning, the example of Turkey, it is a demand side condition. And then you need a supply side condition, which is the political party politicizing this issue in order to gain votes. Now, in the example of Turkey, you have demand side conditions, but then you have New Democracy that is taking that space, because the New Democracy is doing in a much more mainstream approach, right? I don't want to be misunderstood that New Democracy has the same policy as the Golden Dawn, not at all, but to some extent is taking this space. And of course, the Golden Dawn has, let's say, bigger fish to fry at the moment, bigger concerns. So there's not enough space for them to actually vocalize their ideas as well. So I think at the moment, for the time being, New Democracy is taking this space. The question is, what happens when, because I think in New Democracy, there are internal struggles. And things there is in the more kind of progressive wing of the party, but there's a lot of other people who are in a different sort of, they have a different orientation. And the question is the Prime Minister able, under his umbrella, to combine those views in a way that satisfies both wings of the party or not? If there's going to be a problem within New Democracy, then that could open additional opportunities for smaller parties. I mean, let's not forget we have Vasilopoulou party in the parliament. Is rather minor, but you never know what will happen, and history teaches us in the European context that it ebbs and flows with the far right. So I will never make a conclusive argument about the Golden Dawn or any other party that they're totally gone. But certainly, I would say that at the moment the conditions are not there.
If I may take advantage of my privilege as the moderator, before you go, a question that has been troubling me since the phenomenon of the Golden Dawn became so big and headlines around the world kept referring to it, was the link between economic anxiety and ideological considerations. So if an economic crisis can change our political views so much to lead us all the way into voting for a far-right party. I mean, what level of economic pain, let me put it bluntly, what level of economic pain turns you into a fascist? And do you feel disappointed by the reaction of Greek society to the Golden Dawn or not, with respect to, what I've just said?
Yes, I think that's an excellent point. My answer to the first, so how deep an economic crisis do you need to have? I don't think that it's economic crisis in and by itself, because we've seen economic crisis across Europe. We saw it in Spain, we saw it in Portugal, right? In Cyprus as well. But the Golden Dawn, in a way, was a unique phenomenon. I mean, we did see Vox much later on, but again, Vox is not as comparable to the Golden Dawn. So to me, the economic crisis is a trigger. The problem is when the state and political actors associated with the state are perceived as illegitimate. And then you have widespread disillusionment. And then you have this argument that I am willing to overlook some of these ideas because I want to change the personnel, I want to shock the system. So I think this is what happened. And of course, we're talking about the rise of the Golden Dawn, but certainly it was not the entire electorate that.
Yeah, of course.
Still a minority of people, a significant minority, but a minority nonetheless.
So in a way, you're more disappointed by the failure of elites rather than the reaction of the people on the ground.
Well, I think I would refrain from expressing an emotional statement about that because I would like to give my talk from a political scientist point of view rather than a citizen's point of view, although I fully understand the question. And I think it is a combination. I think it is a combination of elite failure, and that relates to both mainstream parties that propagated a system for years, a free system that was eroding from within. And actually, there is very interesting academic research that asks the question of, actually, why did the system implode now, right? If it imploded now, how come it survived for so many years, considering all the problems that we all knew it had?
Yeah.
There is an elite agency there, certainly.
Yeah, I'm old enough to remember that we kept talking about the failures of the Greek system prior to the European debt crisis, right?
It's nothing new. And really, the puzzle is how come it didn't implode earlier, if you see what I mean. So it was kind of waiting to happen. So there's certainly elite with regards to that. At the same time, I think there is something else to take into consideration, which is how is it possible that, again, a minority of individuals are willing to disregard or turn a blind eye, or I don't know how else to put it, to the whole violent aspect and intolerance and lack of equality and so on, in order to satisfy this kind of idea about the nation being proud and so on. So there, I think we need to have some educational reform about how we teach national identity and how we teach history to the Greek people. And that's not to say that, I mean, nationalism can also be a good thing, right? It's through nationalism that states develop and become established. So I'm not making an anti-nationalism statement, but certainly some elements could be presented a little bit differently so that perhaps some of these ideas are not going to stay. So the fact that I think, 20% of the people say, or some respondents of that survey said that these ideas, we want a party that advocates some of these ideas, then I think that's also gives you an indication that perhaps we are at a stage that the support for the Golden Dawn is dropping, but there's a bedrock of some idea still in the society. So at some point, under other conditions, maybe there will be another party taking advantage of that.
Let's hope that this sediment doesn't bear any new fruit. Thank you very, very much, Sophia. I know your daughter is anxious to see you. So we'll let you go. Thank you very much to our audience. We have a series of events coming up, so stay tuned, and hopefully we'll see you again soon. Take care, Sophia.
Thank you for inviting me. Bye.